I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector Podcast. And I have joining me today Dr. Steve Beresford, who is a director and technical advisor to Power Metallic, formerly Power Nickel. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Michael.
This is a great opportunity for my audience to learn a lot in this podcast because Power Nickel that's the former name, Power Metallic, has discovered potentially a polymetallic resource on their property in northern Quebec. And not a whole lot is known about polymetallic resources. And you are, in fact, one of the preeminent experts in this field. So, as I say, it's really good to go right to the horse's mouth and to people that really understand these types of things. So this is going to be a little bit different discussion than what our listeners are normally used to. But before we get down that road, let's start off, as I always do, for those who aren't familiar with the company. Let's give a brief overview of what Power Metallic, as I say, formerly Power Nickel, is and what they're doing.
Yeah, thanks very much, Michael. Power Metallic is obviously a junior mining company. Our main project is the Nisk project in Quebec in the James Bay. The Nisk project consists of two main prospects, a nickel prospect called Nisk and a new discovery called Lion. And it's Lion that's really the focus of the attention. That's the prospect it's showing the polymetallic grades, the very, very high copper, platinum group element and gold and silver grades. And that's become the focus of attention in the last sort of 12 to 18 months.
Yes, so let's start with that. You know, we've seen multiple minerals on a resource before, but what exactly is a polymetallic? How rare is it, and how exciting is it to actually find one?
Yeah, so technically, these are all types of nickel sulfide systems, and nickel's having obviously a down moment at the moment in terms of nickel price and demand. But nickel sulfides have always included a range of diverse systems that vary according to three primary metals: nickel, copper, and the platinum group elements. Most nickel sulfide systems produce very trivial amounts of copper and PGEs, but very, very rarely we get what we call large zone systems. And the zoning is systematic across large scale between nickel dominance and copper PG dominance. And the reason why this is significant is not only do you end up with true payable polymetallic multiple metals, rather than what I would describe as nickel plus credit metals, you actually get further enrichment, geological processes that enrich the deposit in copper and PGs to a supra-economic grade. So just to rewind on that, it's not just a nickel system. The difference is not just genetics or academic, it's pure economics. These systems tend to have very, very large output of copper tons. So the world's largest deposit of this type is in the Norilsk camp in Russia, the Oktябрьский system. And out of that deposit, you get 480,000 tons of copper alone per annum. That puts it in the scale of most of the world's large porphyry systems. So these are unusual systems. Most people are used to nickel sulfides in Canada, perhaps relative to komatiite systems or deposits like Crawford, which are nickel dominant. But really, you got the really unusual Sudbury camp, which includes zone systems from nickel to copper. And that's a little bit more what we're talking about here. So we're talking about economics. We're talking about systems that have high copper and platinum group elements, high noble metals, and potentially nickel as well. And as a result, their value per ton is significantly higher than your average nickel deposit. And that all that polymetallic really means is multiple metals. But I just want to emphasize it's pure economics. We're talking about more than just credit metals. We're talking about, dominant payable and a very much a copper-rich, PG-rich ore body.
Okay, so if I'm to understand what you've just explained correctly, not only is there multiple metals within this discovery, but those metals unto themselves would be economically viable if the other metals didn't exist. Is that a good way of wrapping it up?
I think it is, because one of the things I could probably enlarge on that by saying at the moment, a lot of nickel sulfide systems around the world would be in the doldrums, but I would say polymetallic systems remain the best economic deposit style of any type of metal anywhere in the world right now. So the fact that we can have that, I just make that statement, and it's easily to validate that by going and checking on a few of these deposits, just illustrates you that there's quite a lot of economic nuance in the difference between a nickel system and a polymetallic system. We're really covering everything in the current market, from uneconomic systems all the way to the most economic systems you can imagine. Large amounts of copper, PGEs in their own rights coming out of the ground, let alone whether there's nickel sulfides present.
And these are extremely rare. Like, how many of these polymetallic systems would there be active in the world that we are aware of right now?
So one of the key elements here is the word polymetallic just implies multiple payable metals. There are low-grade examples in the world, but in terms of a high grade, and this will become important because the zoning is a key characteristic. There'll be dominantly copper, and then there'll be dominantly nickel. And this is a well-understood geological process, but in terms of economics, zoned and polymetallic, the last discovery was 18 years ago in Sakatti in Finland, made by Anglo-American. The world's largest deposit is Oktyabrsky in Russia. Sudbury is an example of these systems. Sudbury has a unique origin, but they're all examples of all these processes operating. So Canada is familiar with this, just a bit more unusual at Sudbury. The Russians are obviously very familiar with this, but it's not a deposit style that we see regularly. And that's part of the question as to what's interesting and unusual about lion. It's not something you see every day.
Okay, yeah, I've heard lion referred to as a unicorn, meaning that it's very unique and almost mythical in its makeup. Now, when we hear about polymetallic, and I'm probably going to be, I'm not a geologist, I'm probably mixing and matching, but whenever I hear multiple metals in a system, I generally think of a VMS system.
Yeah.
This is not the same as a VMS, so how does this system differ dramatically from a VMS system that most of our listeners are probably familiar with?
One good, so a different deposit style, but a good analog is high grade and multiple metals. It means good value per ton. So VMSs have built a large amount of Canada. They've played a very important role here. The other deposit styles that are high grade, you can get high grade nickel sulfide systems. The polymetallic nickel copper PGE systems are a little bit bigger in scale than VMS. So we're talking about, or at least aiming for a system that's just larger than the big VMS camps. But so a little bit more special, again, would be the ambition. So Sakatti is about all in a total million metal tons of nickel, say nickel equivalents, if we wanted to put them all together in equivalent values. And Oktyabrsky is closer to 50 million, so way bigger than any VMS. One of the things that's really hard in having this conversation is, in order to explain this, we tend to talk in equivalency. So what we do is calculate what all the multiple metals together are worth, say, if it was only copper, and record it and outline it as if it's copper equivalents. That's some of the market will read that and ask, well, are all of those metals truly economic, and are they all actually pullable? Can you pull them out of the ground? And that is a really very important question. In these high-grade systems, the answer is yes. But in low-grade system, the answer is you'll need a lot of met work, and there's a fair amount of work that's got to be done before investors will be confident in the actual recoveries and metallurgy of the low-grade polymetallic systems. So VMSs, people are very used to them. High-grade copper PG nickel systems. The world knows how to do this. And one of the things I tell people when people ask, rare deposits always scare people because of the metallurgy. I went, there is a camp in the province right next to me that has been doing this for 100 years. So there is nothing unusual about this. It's just we're not in Sudbury in this particular case.
The history to Lion, basically, it's barely a year old. The Power Metallic, when it was Power Nickel, was exploring their Nisk property to the south of it, and they were doing a lot of exploration on its own that looked like a very nice nickel property. And the geologists that were working on that were doing geological exploration north of that, as we refer to colloquially, kicking rocks. And they said to Terry, we've got a little bit of budget left this year's drill program. Let's drop a drill hole here and see what's underneath, because we're getting some interesting returns on the surface. And lo and behold, Terry drops this drill. He comes up, shows the polymetallic in it, and the whole future of this company is changed virtually overnight. You came on as a director and a technical consultant because, again, you're one of the preeminent experts in this particular area of geology shortly after that. So what was it about that one drill hole that grabbed your attention and said, hey, I got to be a part of this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So this is all I do. A few years ago, I left the corporate world and set myself up and run a number of companies around the world. And the only thing I look for are polymetallic systems. So the only thing I look for, another way of phrasing that is I only look for very rare, very valuable deposits. It's very niche, very boutique thing to do. But the logic is I'm really backing myself in the latter half of my career to use my experience to find these unusual but very valuable systems. So I've obviously spent a lot of time. I've worked in 67 countries now across the world, and I've been fortunate enough to work in the Russias and Chinas of this world. And so I've seen these big polymetallic systems, and I know what they look like, and I know how to recognize them with a great deal of confidence early. And I think I know how to explore for them. So my reaction is I would describe it as saying I instantly knew what I was looking at.
Okay, that's a good sign. So since that one hole, there's been a lot more exploration and drilling and work done on the line as well as them advancing the Nisk, but we are concentrating on the line project. Beyond that first drill hole, now what have we actually learned about Lion to date, and compare that in relationship to some of these other projects that you've already mentioned?
Yeah, so Lion to date is dominantly a thin to thick zone. It varies from 10 to 15 meters, probably on average, up to we've had intersections of 40 to 60 meters. Some of those are not quite true thickness, but that's somewhere on the order of the thicknesses that you can imagine of massive to semi-massive chalcopyrite and cubanite. So those are two copper sulfides, very, very simple geology. The logic behind it is these sulfides are hosted on the edge of an ultramafic intrusion, which is where they would have formed, and they've now been remobilized into this very simple sheared fold limb shear zone. And so it's been a bit like shooting fish in a barrel. It's pretty straightforward structure and very straightforward, just continuing to add to the copper tons and PGE ounces, if you like. And that's been our job, grow this to as big as possible. I've been very, very clear from the beginning that this system will be zoned from copper rich to nickel rich. So that needs to have some explanation. There are two possible scenarios. One is Nisk is the nickel end member and the copper end member is Lion. That's 5.5 kilometres apart. The more logical way of looking at it is that somewhere at depth, underneath Lion, the system will zone from copper rich, which we've been drilling now for most of the last year, and becomes more nickel rich. The larger the copper zone becomes, the larger the theoretical nickel zone will become as well at depth. But huge amount of confidence that that will happen. When and how economic that looks like is what the truth machine is required, and we've just got to keep stepping out and drilling holes. We've brought in to the team experts in geophysics, in looking at the EM systems and downhole EM systems to try and drive the system to find this larger collection of nickel sulfides, and that's really where we're at the moment. So the last visuals that we released to the market have shown some presence of nickel sulfides, and so obviously, you know, we're still very motivated to try and connect this from a copper system into a nickel system, and that, you know, as I've said all the way along, that's always been theoretically, it's always been the case that this system was going to go from one zone of copper and PGs into something else.
So the step outs that you're doing now is moving from Nisk north towards Lion and Lion south towards Nisk to find where the copper and the nickel swap out, I guess, for lack of a better term for it.
Yeah, so you'll notice that we're doing a mixture of that. We also have a new zone that we found slightly to the northeast of Lion, which we informally called Tiger. So there is real potential for there to be more to the story in terms of metal targets zones than just Nisk and Lion. They are the two large obvious intrusions that you see that are on our property, and they are the things that are both full of mineralization. So Nisk at the moment, we've sort of left it for a little while. We're returning to it. As we learn what's going on at Lion, we're learning more and more about Nisk as well. But the focus in terms of getting out shiny stuff is around just making Lion as big as possible. So one of the early questions that some of our investors have pointed out is, you know, how big is this deposit? And if you can't tell us how big it is, how quickly can you tell us how big it is? So what we've been doing is stepping out as large as we can using the technology we can, which is downhole EM, borehole EM. And then at some stage, we'll have to come back and infill to turn this into a resource. That is not a plan for 2025. That's something that we'll look towards next year. This year, we're trying to find what I call an order of magnitude. So trying to answer some of the question from our majors of investors, which is, you know, how big a deposit are we talking here?
Now, comparing this to some of the other polymetallic deposits in the world, you said that it's a 5 kilometer distance between, you know, Lion and Nisk. Are these other polymetallic mines, are they that big that this could all be interrelated?
One can be ambitious for a second and say there are, but there's also the possibility that there's two separate systems. And one of the key things about nickel sulfides that's different to, say, anybody who's familiar to other very large core copper systems, porphyries or sediment-hosted copper, like some of the things Robert Friedland has in the DRC, those are massive, large, lower grade systems. So very huge in their footprint, very large mines, either very large open pit systems, and very difficult to hide those sort of things. Whereas nickel systems, much like, and polymetallics the same, and so are VMS, very small footprint. It's all about grade. It's all about high grade, but it means you can fit more of them into a smaller space because the tons, we're talking about a higher grade. So some of the things we talk about with analysts, you know, what would be an average grade of something we were looking at Lion? It's around 5%. That's, you know, a lot higher than any other copper deposit style. So we're talking about something higher grade, and therefore we can find smaller tons. So we could find several deposits on our property, and we could also dream, obviously, of connecting it all and growing into something more significant. At the moment, you know, I'm literally here in Ottawa with the team, and we just iterate and pivot. So what we do is just listen to the geology, and at the moment, the geology is telling us to follow down deep, and that's what you'll see us doing. Occasionally, if we get sidetracked and come to Nisk, it's not really truly sidetrack. It's testing ideas, trying to connect these systems. What we don't want to do is drill wildcat holes. We've got the technology, we've got the team, we're really humming at the moment. We've really got the workflow nailed down, and all we need to do is just keep systematically stepping through this. We're well funded. We've got the funding for this. And we've got the promised drill programs that we said we would take through until April. We've got the promised drill programs we've talked about for the end of this year. And it's just a case of going through them. We really are just there's an old idiom in exploration, which is, NQ finds the deposit IQ finds the deposit and NQ delivers it. And we very much need to just, drill a lot of holes. That's the aim of the game this year.
Yeah, and a release came out last week that doubled the number of drills that are going to be active on your site from 3 to 6. So that is a good sign that this is going to start to move at a much quicker pace than it has. If I understand, then, to wrap all this up in a bow, then we know that there's a polymetallic discovery at Lion. What we don't know is how deep and how big it is. And the future drill programs going forward are going to step out and go down deeper in order to answer those questions. Is that the plan for this year?
Yeah, it is. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I think, a lot of the podcasts they've done and the like, I've told people we're just following the geology. At that moment, I think we were probably stepping out on 45-degree plunge. It's got steeper than that. And that's something to expect from an investor's point of view, is we're literally going to just do what we're told. The geology dictates how we work. So if we look like we're pivoting and going deeper, it's just we're following the nose. We're following what the metal detector says. So the system we use downhole EM is very much like a metal detector. So in the environment we've got, the only thing that's conductive at present is our nickel and copper sulfides. So we literally just light it up and follow the metal detector. It's really very, very straightforward. Got some good people, like I said, and got the funding to do this, and you're going to see the meters come out, and the resource the deposit will just grow to be as big as it is. And I'm super confident, because it's a zone system, that at some stage in the future we'll be talking about a system that has X tons of copper and X tons of nickel, and along with that, the PGEs. The other thing we've promised is the first phase of metallurgical work will be coming out this year. That it's a complex process, not nickel and copper, but platinum group metals. You've really got to de-risk this process. We know from Sudbury that this is different than PGEs and other deposits, because the PGEs are hosted and the gold and the silver are hosted in the chalcopyrite, and so you pull out the chalcopyrite for a concentrate and you pull out the PGEs. So we're again confident, but one of the things you've got to do in this world is deliver on that confidence, and you'll see those results coming out. The first phase of those results coming out this year as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot of news flow going to be coming. I understand the drill results of the last drill program are starting to trickle in, and we're expected to see those results via release over the next few weeks. And those will obviously dictate where you guys are going to go next. So if people want to continue to follow this story, all these drill results that are coming, the next phase of drill plans, etc., what's the best way to do this?
So either follow our website or we're on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. Obviously, Twitter is a big thing here in North America, so that seems to be the major area that people are following us, or just direct on the PNPN on our website.
Wonderful. I want to thank you very much for your time today and helping us to understand what a polymetallic resource is and how special it is to have actually found one. And good luck with the with the process in making this economically viable.
Thanks very much for the invitation and the time, Michael. Appreciate it.
Power Metallic is a paid sponsor of the Prospector News. The host owns shares in Power Metallic, bought at the market for investment purposes. The Prospector News podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.